John 8:56 says, your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and he was glad. Now, if you want to understand the nature of something, start where it started so that you can have a clue of what it's all about. And I think this particular verse, John 8:16, it's better we start from the beginning of this story. And the beginning is in Genesis 15. From 1 to 6, that talks about the Lord's covenant with Abraham and says, after this, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision. He says, do not be afraid, Abraham. I am your shield. I am your great reward. 2 says, but Abraham says, sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abraham says, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him. This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him out, that is, God took Abraham out and said, look up at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them, then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Abraham believed the Lord, and it was credited unto him as righteousness. Now, this gives us a context of the topic of this video, why you need to think big, or else you're going to die in mediocrity. In this story, God tells Abraham, who is a childless 75-year-old man, to look up and count the stars, and says, if you are, he says, if you are not able to, which definitely he was not able to. Now, for the record, no one is able to. I want us to know that. In a clear night sky in my village, there are just a blanket of stars. I mean, billions and billions of stars. So counting the stars would be like trying to count the grain of sand on the seashore. Obviously, it's not possible. Now, to get a picture of how impossible this would be, it is estimated that there are about 1 septatrillion stars in the universe. Septatrillion. So if you want to understand what a septatrillion is, it is 1 with 48 zeros on the end. 1 and 48 zeros on the end. That is a septatrillion. So when God says, count the stars, if you can, the reality is Abraham could not, and Abraham cannot. Now, what do we pick from this story is that God is challenging this old man to think big. Imagine at this point, the old man was childless. He did not have any child, and God brings him out and says, no, look at the sky and count. That is going to be the seeds. That's going to be your seed. And you know, Abraham was childless, and he says, we are flesh and blood. So he is breaking into this 75-year-old man and and asking him to think big. Is asking him think big. Now, let's remember that God is not a respecter of persons. In other words, what it does to Abraham is not only for Abraham. In here, then, is God is giving us a blueprint that he considers when dealing with humans. So when God is giving us ideas, when God is giving us things to do, let us remember that there are 3 parts of it. It must be something that is great or giant. So it has to be a great giant vision. It has to be something that's global. I mean, he tells Abraham that through your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And then it will be generational. So those are the 3 G's that I want you to take in mind. It has to be giant, it has to be global, it has to be generational. And what I'm picking up that when he's telling Abraham, he says, through your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed, all the nations. And by the way, in John, we see in John 8:42, we are seeing 42 generations later, Jesus shows up and confirms that indeed Abraham did not just believe, but Abraham saw him coming. Abraham saw it coming to pass, saw him coming, and Abraham rejoiced about it. Abraham was glad about his vision. Abraham was glad about his future. So it's a lot that we can learn from there. I'm wondering what makes you glad. I'm wondering what makes you excited. From this verse, we are seeing Abraham saw Jesus coming, his seed, and through Jesus, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed. And so Abraham rejoiced. What are you seeing? You know, it's like, you carrying a mango seed, and for the ability to see not just a mango seed, but you are seeing a mango tree. And not just a tree, you are seeing fruits on those trees. And not just seeing the fruits, you're seeing the seeds on those fruits. And then you're seeing the trees on those seeds. And then you're seeing the fruit. So you are seeing a mango forest. Can you be excited about a mango forest when you're carrying a mango seed? That is my challenge to you. That is what we talk about when we're talking about thinking big. You carry a seed, but what's exciting you is really a forest. Now, I am saying in this video, I am going to try to address why most people from my continent and with my pigmentation, why we are not pursuing God's kind of idea, why our ideas are not giant ideas, are not global ideas, and are not generational ideas. You see, because remember again, when we talk about God's idea, it has to be giant, it has to be global, and it has to be generational. So to prove my point, here is a very saddening story that I had that really cut my heart into pieces. It was told about a Nigerian doctor called Success. He's a 40-year-old Nigerian. He lives in England, and he has 2 PhDs, one in physics and then one in psychology. But guess what? He was working as a cleaner, sweeping the floor. Has 2 PhDs, one in physics and one in psychology, but he is sweeping the floor. But aside from that, we have stories of engineers, stories of MBA holders, lawyers, social workers that are stuck and frustrated with a piece of paper and photos on their wall that they call the certificate, and they don't know what to do with their life. So we always, and then we hear and read and watch stories of countless college and university graduates from your country and from my country being killed, raped, and subjected to inhuman conditions in the Arab world. And they come from certain part of the world, and they go there to work as what, housemaids, and to work as security guards and the rest of those kind of jobs. So if I thought I took an interest to look at the recipients of the Nobel prizes. And whereas America alone, by the time I was checking this, they had around 300 and like 87 or 385. UK had 132. German alone had 108. Israel, I think, had 130 something. The whole of Africa as a continent, remember that these countries these things I've mentioned, they are countries. America is a country, UK is a country, Germany is a country, Israel is a country. The whole of Africa as a continent, we have only 11. We have only 11. The whole continent. So it is as if mediocrity and small thinking is our norm. How come we have set this goal for ourselves? How come we have accepted this to be part of our story? Told us that this is what we can achieve, and this is what we can live, this is what we can do. And yet at the same time, God is calling out for a giant, global, and generational idea. When you tell me you're a kingdom person, then you're telling me that you have an idea that is giant, you're pursuing an idea that is giant, that is global, that's generational in nature. So what is the cause of this opposite? What is the cause of this reverse? And then how can this be corrected? So last week here in my country, an associate professor was responding in the newspaper on why we should stop blaming universities for producing job seekers, not job creators, and why graduates can't perform on their jobs. And he tried to compare it with the time of COVID guidelines. And he said, if we started Africa as a continent, and these guidelines had been given in most of our African countries, but no one seemed to be following them. People stopped following them. And he said that these guidelines did not require technical skills, that they needed soft skills. So in such a case, he was putting the question that now who should carry the blame? So he argued that likewise, in universities, they do their part by delivering and preparing the students for the world of work. And in so doing, he says they give both technical skills and soft skills as part of the curriculum. So this was his claim. And then he said one thing that we should not forget, which, by the way, is really what makes what he said, interesting, he says, one thing we should not forget, or that should not be forgotten before blaming university is the role of attitude. He says, entrepreneurship teaches us that your attitude determines your altitude. Your attitude determines your altitude. This means whatever one does, how much he or she does and how far he or she goes depends entirely on his or her attitude. Now think about this, is so huge what he's saying. He's saying really it's not the problem with what is being taught. It is the attitude that receives what is being taught. This is what Professor Dr. Jacob Oluji said, who is the Associate Professor, School of Management in one of our top universities. And no, he's so right. He's so right when he brings it this way. He says it is not what is being taught. It is the attitude of the person who is receiving it. To understand him better, we need to understand first what a curriculum is. That a curriculum is a system of information transfer built around certain philosophies about life that is designed to produce a product just like the philosophy. That is what a curriculum is. Now, here's the mystery. The mystery is that the curriculum that produced you and me, or produced us, were written by the colonial masters, were written by our oppressors. Now, well, let's bear in mind that whatever curriculum produces you, you become like this. Like it, I mean, again, what's a curriculum? A curriculum is a system of information transfer on certain philosophies about life that is designed to produce a product just like that philosophy. See, so you have a certain philosophy that you pass it on, and your target is to produce a product just like that philosophy. That is what a curriculum means. So here's the mystery. The curriculum that the oppressor wrote was designed by the oppressor for the oppressor's children, not for the oppressed children. That is so huge. This changed my life when I understood this. See, the curriculum is designed for his children, to use to produce children just like the oppressor is. That was the plan. But then the oppressor said, okay, he also allowed the children of the oppressed to use the same curriculum. When the oppressed started, rebelling and making, so they demanding, said, okay, here's the same curriculum. But the problem is here that the raw material for the curriculum is the mentality of the children. The raw material for the curriculum is the attitude, is the mentality, is the thinking of the children that the curriculum is going to impact. So it is not really the curriculum that produces, it is the attitude, the mentality. So if the raw material, it says, if the raw material is not right, then the impact of the curriculum on the mentality of the student is compounded double negative. In other words, it does negative times 2. It does negative to the power 2. So instead of taking it forward, it takes it backward times 2. That is the effect. If the raw material, if the mentality, if the attitude is right, is wrong, I mean, you see, the oppressor's child was born in the home of the oppressor, right? So he is born in an environment where he is trained to think like the oppressor. He is already thinking that he's somebody. He's already thinking he can do all things. He's already thinking he's in charge. He's already thinking I'm powerful, I'm awesome, I'm the boss. You see, he's already thinking he has a dream to accomplish that is so big, global, and all this kind of thing. He knows who he is. So as a kid, he's now living in this environment that he already knows who he is. So that is why in our situation here, your great-grandfather and my great-grandfather, they called the oppressor's little boy who was like 5-year-old a master. Imagine, just 5 years, 3 years, he was being called a master. Think about that. Suppose your parents called you a master from day one. Just your parent, not even the servants in the house. Just your parent. Would you be doing what you're doing now? If your parents were calling you master, if the people around you, when you're young, they were calling you a master, you see, would you be doing what you're doing? Would you be pursuing what you're pursuing? Would you be thinking the way you're thinking? So to understand our problem, we must understand these 3 key things. One is what is referred to as your self-concept. Again, what's a self-concept? The self-concept is an idea of self constructed from your belief you hold about yourself and the responses of others. We repeat it again. Self-concept, the idea of self, constructed from the belief one holds about oneself and the responses of others. You see, your self-concept comes from the belief you hold about yourself and also the responses of others. So if I were to ask you, have you thought about your self-concept? What is your self? Is it positive or it's negative? Unfortunately, a lot of us have negative self-concept. The second important thing for us to understand is self-esteem. What is self-esteem? Self-esteem is confidence in one's own worth and ability. For you to be a big dreamer, for you to pursue the ideas of God, for us to break off this mental slavery that is making us to live in mediocrity, we must address these three S's. Number one is self-concept. Number two is self-esteem. I mean, your confidence in your own worth and abilities. Most of us, unfortunately, our confidence comes from the external. Our confidence comes from the things that we own, the level of the level of education we have achieved. So if we meet other people who are better than us, we disappear. If we meet people who are better than us, who own more than us, we disappear because we have wrong self-esteem. So, and then the third S is self-worth. Self-worth, very important, is opinion you have about yourself and the value you place on yourself. So these three things are key if you desire to dream big. If we are going to be able to pursue the ideas of God, if we are going to bring to pass our promised land, then we must address our self-concept, our self-esteem, and our self-worth. So in our example, I'm trying to understand why Dr. Success at the age of 40 with with the PhD in physics and psychology sweeping the ground, because in the oppressor's case, this little boy, the oppressor's child, received his self-concept. He received his self-esteem. He received his self-worth from birth. He received it from home. He did not receive it from school. School did not give him those things because school is not meant to give those things. He was receiving it from home. Again, self-concept is the idea of self constructed from the belief one holds about oneself and the responses of others. So when others were calling this man master, this little boy master, and the little boy knew who he was, he knew that was a boss, he knew he was powerful, he was correcting, he was building his self-concept. Then self-esteem is confidence is in his own worth. He knew that he was worth. He knew that he carried something that this generation needs. He knew that he was powerful. He believed in his abilities. And then self-worth, which is opinion he had about himself and the value he places on himself, he now had a high self-worth. So you can see that even before the curriculum hits him, he already knows who he is. He's already clear about his dream. He's already clear about his position in history. He already knows his worth, how important he is, how significant he is, how powerful he is. He is a master. He can do all things. And then it is reinforced when an adult is calling him a master. Look at that arrangement. Look at that situation. Everything is working to position the son, the child of the oppressor, to think big, to go and dominate the world. So if you have a child who is already secure in his self-concept, already knows his self-worth, is already convinced about his self-esteem, all you have to teach that child is how to read, how to write, and how to do arithmetic. Then he's ready for his dreams because he already has the dream inside of him. His mind is wide. He's already counting the stars, billions. He's already seeing all this possibility. So they don't need to learn how to love themselves. They don't need to learn how to believe that they can do all things. They already got that with them. They already got that as they were growing up. So the curriculum is designed by their parent to teach them how to read, how to write, and how to do arithmetic so that they can go and bring their dream to pass. So they can now learn how to get the skills so that they can be in charge and rule in their area of influence, in their area of dominion, in their domain. That is why they learn the skills. So the oppressor decides and says, okay, since now the natives are becoming a little bit restless, we will give them the same education. We will give them the same curriculum. So the curriculum that raised you and that raised me, we citizens of the third world, it was the colonial master's curriculum designed by the colonial master. And now it is placed on our mind, on us who hate ourselves. I was trained, I used to train, and I was having a contract here with one of the big NGOs in my country, and I was training children. Youths, I mean. And one of the things that broke my heart was one time when we're dealing with this idea of self-concept and self-worth and what. And this kid who was in primary 6 was telling me that they were calling him when he eats like a dog. They were calling him he rapes people. That he was. I seen the guy had poor, no self-concept at all, no self. He hated himself. He's at school because he feels he wants to pay back a society, how he's not loved. He hates himself. He has no self-concept. He has no self-worth. He has no self-esteem. And so he's learning how to read and how to write and how to do arithmetics. So what is going to come out of him? What is going to come out of him? So he goes from primary, then he goes to O level, which is ordinary level, and then he can go to advanced level, and then he goes to university, and then he gets a PhD. In what? In what? In what? To do what? Because his head is already damaged. Do you see why we are dreaming small? Do you see why we are living in mediocrity? Do you see why if we don't change and go with the mode of God, we are going to be trapped? Because PhD with self-hatred, PhD with low self-esteem, PhD with no self-worth, PhD with no self-concept, it is our challenge. It is our challenge because we do not have a dream, but we have a skill. We don't know who we are, but we are skilled. So we are only prepared to work for others. So they told our parents, you see, if your sons and your daughters get an education, we shall give them a job. We shall give them a job. So the 3 things, which is how to read, how to write, and how to do arithmetic. If we master that, then we're going to get jobs. So our parents' number 1 admonition for us was, go get an education so that you can get a job. They did not tell us, love yourself. You are valuable. You are an asset to your generation. You are here to change the world. You can do all things. That's not what they told us. So you think that education is the answer? No, education is not the answer. I disagree. Nothing is worse than a well-educated self-hater. Because all you are thinking is like the story of that boy. He's only thinking of oppressing others. He's looking for a situation so that he can pay others. So we need to understand that you yourself, for you to begin to change the world and live in your area of dominion and dream as God is challenging Abraham, you need to understand and you need to shift from seeing education just from the 3 areas of writing, reading, and doing arithmetic to now self-concept, self-worth, and self-esteem. This is only possible if now we get reconnected back to our true source. We begin to understand who we are and understand where we come from. You see, David in Psalms 82 verse 4 says, your self-concept is you are made in God's image, in his likeness, with his power. That is your self-concept. And no IQ test can measure that. No exam can measure your potential. There's nothing that can come out and say, this is how, because if they say you're stupid, then it means that, no, that's how God is stupid. You are in the image of God, in the likeness of God. So we should be able to do better than anybody expected of us. This was the story of David himself. Even his parents did not call him in his own coronation. They did not expect. But when Samuel anointed the first one, God said, no. The second one, no. The third one, no. After the 7th one, no. And he said, that these all your sons? The father said, yeah. And so there is this other one. Imagine, nobody believed in David. But yet, he proved to his parents that it was better than they expected of him. That is your task, and that's my task. All right. So the curriculum of our education should not be able to define who we are. Forget about that. Pursue who you believe you are in your core. This is how me and you can decide to begin to change the world by beginning to adopt God's model of thinking big, of being excited about our dream coming to pass, and not being excited about what is happening now, but what is happening in the future. If we take up this, then we are on the path to change the world. So You have two decisions. Either you're thinking big or you're going to live forever in mediocrity. I pray you take up and address your self-worth, your self-concept, and your self-esteem, so that you begin to understand at the core who you are and step out to pursue God's idea in your life. Thank you, and I will see you in the next.